All right, folks, it is 9:45, and so we'll get started, and we may be able to get done a little bit early today. So those of you that are been to first service, you'll be able to get on with maybe what plans you have today with your family and friends this holiday weekend. My name's Adam Rush. I've been teaching this class with Daniel Falkenheim. Daniel is at the Lads to Leaders convention with his family down in Louisville, I believe, so he's not here today. So we've been going through a series called He Was Here from the Gospel Advocate Foundation series. And if you're visiting with us, the lesson series is essentially looking at different places in the New Testament, or different actual locations where Jesus was active in his ministry. This particular location, we're a little bit out of order because Daniel had a specific interest in talking about Jericho, which he did last week, and we also had one week where we had a guest speaker from Hope for Haiti's Children here talking about that organization. So we're looking at Emmaus today. There's really not a lot to say about the location itself, and we'll get into that here in a second because it's really only mentioned one time in Scripture. The events of what happened are also, the specifics of it are really just mentioned in Luke, but we do have a reference to it in one of the other Gospels. So we'll get right into the lesson. Again, we may get done early here, but usually I'll start by reading the text, but today I'm going to do a little bit different. We're going to get into the text at the end, and then I'm going to try to make a little bit of a connection to our faith and a character, a specific individual in the Bible who is known somewhat for not having faith, but just to talk about that as well as we go through things. So, and then the lesson will be yours today. And I think I got this to work. So, all scriptures will be from the New American Standard Bible. That's just the one I happen to prefer to use. Not because I think it's necessarily a better translation. It's just a more literal translation. So that's what I've been accustomed to using. And I put a photo up. This was some painting or artist's rendering of the scene of what we're going to be looking at today in the road to Emmaus. You know, we don't know much about the place itself. In fact, when you really think about it, they're on the road most of the time. They do finish, I guess, I assume in that village or that place when they have their meal together that evening. But we know it involves, we'll set the scene here, and this clicker is really moving fast today for me, so I apologize. But we'll set the scene, and we'll talk about when this occurred and who was involved, and again, a little bit about the location. Boy, I realize now I'm getting older. I can't even wear my glasses to look at slides. I have to take them off. But I may just take them off the whole time because I can't see. But that we know that we're here. You know, this is the World Easter Sunday and the Resurrection Day, and we know that this scene actually occurred that same day. You'll notice as we look in the passage, it talks about all of the events of that day and those first individuals who were aware that the tomb was empty, those first individuals that had a view or got to see the risen Savior. And we know that it's that same day that he comes upon these two individuals walking along this road to Emmaus. So that's the time. Who's involved? The participants? Well, we've got obviously three individuals. We know Jesus. We'll see the name of one man. His name is Cleopas. He is the only one of the two that is named. We don't know, honestly. It doesn't say if the other person's a man or a woman. Honestly, if you look at the text, it doesn't say. It just says two, I believe it says two individuals, and we'll look at the text again. But some have speculated, again, this is all speculation, many have speculated that other individual could have been Luke. Again, Luke is the only gospel writer to specifically talk about the specifics of the event. But we don't know. Others have speculated it could be the wife of Cleopas. Again, it could have been, that's who was walking along the road. We just don't know. We only know Cleopas. And again, we only have the account specifically talked about in the Gospel of Luke, although we'll show the text from Mark. Mark has, obviously Mark is the shortest gospel. I believe it's only 16 chapters, so he's a little briefer sometimes in his accounts of certain things, and he gives us a brief account of this event, which obviously is helpful because I think we can have more assurance that things have occurred when you see multiple gospel writers making note of it. That doesn't mean I don't believe things that are just mentioned in one gospel. It just means that I think that is helpful to know that it wasn't just one writer that makes mention of this, that these events became known to others. If you look at location, and again, that map's a little hard to see probably, but this is Bible Atlas, which I've used for my maps. I think Daniel's using the same thing. It's a nice website, and they provide things to you for free looking at maps. But we really do not have any particular ruins or clear known location for Emmaus. So some of the other cities we've talked about, they still, in some form may exist today, or there were ruins or specific areas that were pretty certain were probably that place. But with Emmaus, we don't really have a clear location. But what we do know is that the writer, Luke, gives us some detail there. He says in the passage that if in the English translation it says 7 miles, if you look at literally, that was 60 stadia, which each stadion, a singular, was about 600 feet. So 60 times 600, divide that by, I believe it's 5,280 approximately feet in a mile. So it comes out to be about, I think, 6.8 miles. I did it on my phone calculator yesterday. So about 7 mile distance. That's what we know. Some have speculated that traditionally there's a place called Emmaus or Amwas that has been the suspected location because it fits with the distance. And the meaning of Emmaus was hot springs, or in Josephus' meaning, he said warm bath. So I assume there were some springs there that led to the name. And that's really all we know about the place. So this map tries to give us an idea of where Emmaus may have been. Again, we just know what we know from. It's one of those situations where it says what it says, it means what it means. We just know that at the time that's where it was, about 7 miles from Jerusalem, but we don't have good information otherwise in today's day what was what. And then I did look quickly at the passage in Mark, because it's a very simple, it's a very brief account, where in the last chapter of Mark says, and this is verse 12 and 13, after that, and he's talking about some of the appearances he made resurrection day, he appeared in a different form to 2 of them while they were walking along on their way to the country. They went away and reported it to the others, but they did not believe them either. And I do want to focus a little bit on that as we move forward, that these individuals that met with Jesus, that he taught them on that road, and then they broke bread with him. And a couple of things in this passage, he appeared in a different form. We'll talk about that a little bit later and what really that means. And again, I'm not sure there's some speculation there too. So don't take it as I have a clear understanding of that. But there was something different, about Jesus, that their eyes weren't initially open to who he was, and how that occurred and why that occurred. Again, I'm not totally sure, but we'll talk a little bit about it. And then they did not believe them either. So when we look at the passage, we'll see that once they had that encounter with Jesus, they didn't just go to bed. They were pretty excited about it. They end up going back to Jerusalem and find the apostles and other disciples. And it's clear from Mark's account that what they told them, not all those believed them. Not all the folks that were there that, again, had not yet seen Jesus in resurrected form. They weren't willing to just believe. Even these individuals that clearly were from what we can tell, legitimate disciples and legitimate, true followers of Jesus. So just something interesting to look at there. We do, and when you talk about the different form, I'll talk about it a little bit here because I've got it in my notes and I don't want to forget it. But, what was this form that Jesus took on? Well, we know some things about his resurrected body had to be somewhat different. Again, we know that the scars were there. We know that Thomas, we'll look at Thomas today and what he wanted to see and what he wanted to feel. But there were some things a little bit different about Jesus in resurrected form. For one, right when those disciples that were on the road to Emmaus get back to Jerusalem, we'll see that Jesus comes into their midst that same night. And the door, and when we read it in John, the account in John, specifically John 20:19, Jesus went through locked doors. Of course, these disciples, they're nervous right now about everything that's going on, the apostles. And so when they're meeting together, they don't want people probably to know where they are and what they're doing right now. And so whatever they're in a place that they feel is as secure as it can be. And so they mention, that, and Jesus is able to get into their midst through, doors that were locked. Well, when you look back at Jesus before the resurrection, I think there are a couple of instances where, and somebody can correct me, but there are a couple instances where he's in a situation and somehow he gets, out of that area, like he somehow just passes through their midst without running into any problems. And again, we don't know exactly how that occurred. Maybe he's whisked away with some surrounding him, or maybe he's just able to, because he's not, we know he's not necessarily anything from a look perspective that would draw your eye from a physical standpoint. Maybe he's just able to blend in and get away. We don't know. But in this instance, clearly, he's able to get through this locked barrier and be with the people. And we also know that when we'll read with the folks in Emmaus, when he's at the dinner table, he just vanishes. So I don't recollect anything prior to his resurrection where he vanished from a situation. And again, I'm looking around. If you can recollect something, by all means, correct me. But there was something different about his form. And that doesn't mean he wasn't physical. Clearly he was physical, right? If you look later in Luke chapter 24, and we're not looking at that passage today, but I'll make mention of it. It's clear he wants to show the disciples that he is physical and not some sort of a ghost, right? Because he eats. He says, "Give me fish." There's a specific mention at the end of Luke where he's eating some broiled fish, and the fish isn't visible. It's not like he's see-through and you see the fish, like moving around in his gut or something. Clearly he eats the fish, okay? And they can see that. And so it's another way for Jesus to prove that it is a resurrected physical form that he has. So let's move on. I found this slide, and I don't know if it's a hard to read slide, but I was trying to find something better, but I do like to think on this, again, this Sunday, this first day of the week, Jesus, again, in a time like this, thousands of years ago, rose from the dead. And in the Zondervan, they talk about all of his post-resurrection appearances. And this was another slide that I found online from a website. But if you start on the right, it actually works its way down on the right, and then you have to go to the top on the left. But it's kind of in chronological order for what went the events of the resurrection day, and then the subsequent time that Jesus was on the earth post-resurrection and his appearances. And you can see, Mary Magdalene goes to the tomb, the other women arrive, Peter and John rush to the tomb. I'm on the right. Appearance to Mary Magdalene, appearance to the other women. And then you have the appearance to the two disciples on the road to Emmaus. You have an appearance to Peter that we don't have a lot about that appearance, but we do know that it's mentioned not only in Luke, but also in 1 Corinthians. Then you go to the top left, you'll see the 2 disciples and the 10 apostles. That's the scene immediately after the road to Emmaus scene in Luke that we read about. Again, 10 apostles, we know Thomas was not there, and I want to talk a little bit about him. So again, it's not the easiest to see. It's easier to see up here than it is back there, I guess. But there's also a mention of appearance to James. We don't talk about that much, but there's specific mention in Paul's Corinthian letter about an appearance to James as well that I again find interesting. We don't know much about it. All right. So let's get into the passage now. And Luke 24, 13 through 35, again, I'm reading from the New American Standard Bible. And behold, two of them were going that very day to a village named Emmaus, which was about 7 miles from Jerusalem. And they were talking with each other about all these things which had taken place. While they were talking and discussing, Jesus himself approached and began traveling with them. But their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. And he said to them, "What are these words that you are exchanging with one another as you are walking?" And they stood still, looking sad. One of them, named Cleopas, answered and said to him, "Are you the only one visiting Jerusalem and unaware of the things which have happened here in these days?" And he said to them, "What things?" And they said to him, "The things about Jesus the Nazarene, who was a prophet, mighty in deed and word in the sight of God and all the people, and how the chief priests and our rulers delivered him to the sentence of death and crucified him. But we were hoping that it was he who was going to redeem Israel. Indeed, besides all this, it is the third day since these things happened. But also some women among us amazed us. When they were at the tomb early in the morning and did not find his body, they came, saying that they had also seen a vision of angels who said that he was alive. Some of those who were with us went to the tomb and found it just exactly as the women had also said, but him they did not see. Then their eyes were I think it went back too many there. And he said to them, "O foolish men and slow of heart to believe in all that the prophets have spoken. Was it not necessary for the Christ to suffer these things and enter into his glory?" Then beginning with Moses and with all the prophets, he explained to them the things concerning himself and all the scriptures. And they approached the village where they were going, and he acted as though he were going farther. But they urged him, saying, "Stay with us, for it is getting toward evening, and the day is now nearly over." So he went in to stay with them. When he had reclined at the table with them, he took the bread and blessed it, and breaking it, he began giving it to them. Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him, and he vanished from their sight. They said to one another, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he was speaking to us on the road, while he was explaining the scriptures to us?" And they got up that very hour and returned to Jerusalem, and found gathered together the 11 and those who were with him, saying, "The Lord has really risen, has appeared to Simon." They began to relate their experiences on the road and how he was recognized by them in the breaking of the bread. Go back here to the beginning. So, initially, again, Jesus kind of we don't know, they're just kind of walking along, and somehow Jesus, again, miraculously or however, it comes up upon them. We don't know much more other than that. They're walking and talking, and he just approaches. It's like he catches up with them on the road. And again, their eyes were prevented from recognizing him. It seems to indicate that there was some sort of divine intervention here, that they weren't able to recognize the Lord. Again, they were disciples that had spent time with him. They would know what he looks like. They just weren't, run-of-the-mill city dwellers that may have heard what was going on. They clearly were disciples because they were able to go back to the apostles afterwards, and I don't think the apostles would have let them in if they were just, run-of-the-mill individuals. But they weren't able to recognize him, and he obviously is in tune to their discussion and wants to know what they're talking about. And so this is where we have mention of the one of them, Cleopas, tells them about what's going on. And clearly the events that had occurred have spread very quickly. Think about this again. This is only 3 days after his crucifixion. This is the resurrection day, and it's spreading like wildfire that something has happened that is of tremendous importance, of relevance to all. And then Jesus begins to teach them, and notice that he doesn't just start talking about himself and his ministry, right? He doesn't just start talking about, "Did you not see the miracles that I did? Did you not see," or the miracles that this person did? I guess he hasn't obviously shown himself to them to be Jesus to this point, but he doesn't start just by talking about himself. He goes back to the Old Testament, and he puts it all in context of this being really the master plan of God, that the Messiah would come, that he would lay down his life for all, and that, it was clear, although they weren't seeing it. And it's interesting too that, they are interested, if you look back, I mean, they thought, let me go back here again. They were looking for an earthly kingdom, right? They were looking for something on earth. And Jesus had told his disciples and apostles multiple times that, that's not what I'm here to do. And they didn't understand it again. They didn't understand at the time, but now they're going to start understanding this now that he has been raised from the dead, and it was not an earthly kingdom that he was here to establish, but obviously a heavenly kingdom ultimately. And then the Cleopas, he, as we said before, he starts talking about, hey, we've already heard these rumors, if you want to call them rumors, or discussions about the tomb being empty, and that, there's something going on here. And, we're obviously curious, where our interests are piqued here as to what has transpired and what is transpiring. And then, as we said, Jesus kind of gets into the Old Testament, and it's a little bit, seems a little strong language to say foolish. If you look at, I think one of the commentators I read said, again, it may be more, a better translation may be dull, meaning their mind just wasn't open to what was pronounced earlier, what was prophesied earlier, but maybe they were dull of mind. But foolish, again, is the word that we see here in the New American Standard that's used. But again, he explains everything through the Old Testament. I think it's important for us, I've been to, some people are very focused on kind of almost anything. It's New Testament, and it's, some people talk about their faith that hinges just on the words of Jesus, but clearly Jesus himself tells us the importance of the Old Testament and recognizing the plan that God had in place and the importance of those passages for us to still consider today. So, Jesus doesn't gloss over the Old Testament. He knew the law. He was a follower of the law, and he wants to make sure they understand that, again, all these events go back to God's plan. Jesus is willing to stay with them. Obviously it's getting late in the day, and there was, again, a culture of hospitality that I don't think exists today. I don't think most of us, if we, even if we picked up a hitchhiker, most of us are probably not inviting them back to our home to stay. Maybe some of you have done that, but I don't think most of us are doing that. Or even, maybe we're willing to give them some money if they needed something for a meal, but most of us aren't bringing them into our homes and feeding them. But these individuals, they just met this man, but clearly they noticed there's something special about him, as you can tell when they finally, their eyes are opened. But they say, hey, why don't you come and stay with us, because it's getting late, and we'll break bread together. We'll have a meal together. And so Jesus takes bread, he blesses it, breaks it, and begins giving it to them, and then their eyes are open. They recognized him. So again, was there a divine intervention that they couldn't recognize him initially? Again, it seems to be the case, but after this particular event, they now know who he is. And then they talk about the fact that, boy, inside, we knew something was different. The way he taught us, the way he was explaining the scriptures, clearly there's something special about this man, and now we know who we're dealing with. We now know who we were with. And so, as I said before, they don't waste any time. They're not sitting on their laurels here. This is a pretty big deal. So somebody's been raised from the dead, and it's not just somebody. It's somebody that is of great importance. And so they're going to head back to Jerusalem and make sure that everybody knows that they've seen that. And Mark again tells us that people still didn't believe them when they did that. But I do want to make mention then, and I don't have it up there, but I'm just going to read the passage right after this. And in verse 36 of Luke 24, while they were telling these things, he himself, Jesus, stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be to you." But they were startled and frightened and thought they were seeing a spirit. And he said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts arise in your hearts? See my hands and my feet, that is I myself. Touch me and see. For a spirit does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. While they still could not believe it, because of their joy and amazement, he said to them, so he shows them the hands and feet, and they still, although their joy and amazement, it says that they kind of just still, this can't be real. This couldn't have happened. And that's when he said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and he ate it before them. And again, in the movies, you think about, you see the ghosts or whatever, and they eat something. That's what I have in my mind, kind of when ghosts try to act like they're human, and they put something in, and you kind of see their insides or whatever, and it all kind of just goes out, whatever. This is not the case. He's clearly has a physical form here. And I think that's, with those things, obviously came belief that he had truly risen. And I want to, again, we're going to be done a little early, which is, I think, okay, because there's only so much, I think, in this to talk about Emmaus. Again, we just have the one story. I think it's an important story, but I just want to close with thinking about today and who we are, and in our situation, how we know the risen Lord. We are in the 21st century. We're in 2025. Jesus died and rose over 2,000 years ago. The specific events occurred. Those specific historic events occurred a long, long time ago. But we do have God's word that gives us an account that we can be confident in, based on a lot of factors. And I'm not going to go into, things about the Bible necessarily and how we can know we can be confident in it, but we can, and there's lots of reasons for that. One thing I would say just from this is, again, the consistency of the passages of the resurrection, and how, again, these events are talked about and by multiple individuals, and accounts made by multiple individuals, that we're able to be confident in these events. But I wanted to close by thinking about Thomas, because Thomas is a guy that I think gets a really bad rap, if you want to say, in the Bible, because we always think about him as, if you say Thomas, probably 50% of the time you're going to say you might say doubting Thomas, right? That's just, we still hear that phrase, doubting Thomas. And there's a reason why we hear the phrase, obviously. If you go to the account in John, and I'm going to read the actual account here. There's a reason why we call him that, but I kind of ask myself, again, looking in the mirror, where would I have been if I put myself in his shoes? Because it's clear he wasn't the only one that, wanted to see evidence, right? He wanted to see physical evidence of Jesus' resurrection, because the end of the Road to Emmaus passage, again, when we look in Mark, it says, Mark's account says, and that brief 2-verse account says, when those individuals came back before Jesus appeared to them, people still weren't believing. And that's multiple individuals now that had seen Jesus by that time, including the women, but not just women. But we know that Peter had seen Jesus probably in that same time frame. So if we look at, and we'll start in John 20, verse 19. So it was evening on that day, the first day of the week. And when the doors were shut where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came in and stood in their midst and said to them, "Peace be with you." And when he had said this, he showed them both his hands and his side. The disciples then rejoiced when they saw the Lord. So Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, I also send you." And when he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit." We're not going to talk about the specifics of that today. "If you forgive the sins of any, their sins have been forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they have been retained." But Thomas, one of the 12, called Didymus, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples were saying to him, and again, think about this. These are the people that he is, traveled the area with for the entirety of Jesus' ministry, you would think these are people he trusts, right? These people, you'd think these are people that he can be confident in. And he says, so the other disciples saying to him, we have seen the Lord. But he, Thomas, said to them, unless I see in his hands the imprint of the nails, and put my finger into the place of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. After 8 days, his disciples were again inside, and Thomas with them. Jesus came, the doors having been shut, and stood in their midst, and said, peace be with you. So, at the end of verse 27, it's clear that Jesus, could see the heart of Thomas, knew the heart and mind of Thomas. And he says to Thomas, reach here with your finger and see my hands, and reach here your hand and put it into my side. And do not be unbelieving, but believing. So Thomas clearly did that. He answered and said to him, my Lord and my God. Jesus said to him, because you have seen me, have you believed? Blessed are they who did not see and yet believed. That last verse, obviously it talks about all of us. That we weren't born in that age. We weren't a part of that time period, of Jesus' resurrection to be close to those individuals who did see him, or maybe have a chance to witness his resurrected body. But we still believe. We're here today because we believe that he died for us and that he rose on the third day. But I do want to make mention of all of us can struggle in our faith at times, and it's hard to be hard on Thomas, I think, in this situation, because a lot is going on, and it's a little surprising to me that with, again, it's the closeness he had with these other apostles, that he couldn't take from their word. But still, this is something he needed to see with his own eyes, and he ultimately was able to do that. But I do like to go back to the fact that I think you can call Thomas courageous as well. And this goes back to John 11:16. And so I think it's a point that be careful how you label someone. And all of us are imperfect. All of us at times struggle with our faith. But we can grow from that, and certainly we can learn from that. But this is before, obviously, these events of his doubting. It's around the time of Jesus going to Bethany for Lazarus' resurrection. He raises Lazarus from the dead. And obviously there's concern. At this point, Jesus' ministry has become more known to all, and certainly to the Jews that are not happy with what he's doing. And let's start actually just in verse. Let's start in verse 1 of John 11. We'll read this passage, and then the lesson will be yours. Now, a certain man was sick, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. It was the Mary who anointed the Lord with ointment and wiped his feet with her hair, whose brother Lazarus was sick. So the sisters sent word to him, saying, Lord, behold, he whom you love is sick. But when Jesus heard this, he said, the sickness is not to end in death, but for the glory of God, so that the Son of God may be glorified by it. Now Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, so when he heard that he was sick, he then stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then after this, he said to the disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now seeking to stone you, and you're going to go there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in the day? If anyone walks in the day, he does not stumble, because he sees the light of this world. But if anyone walks in the night, he stumbles, because the light is not in him. This he said, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I go so that I may awaken him out of sleep. The disciples then said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will recover. Sorry, that's with period there. Now Jesus had spoken of his death, but they thought he was speaking of literal sleep. So Jesus then said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Therefore Thomas, who is called Didymus, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, so that we may die with him. Again, Thomas may have struggled at the resurrection with his faith, but we know that he was willing to die for Jesus. He may not have understood everything clearly of what was going on, but he had a passion for Jesus. He clearly was someone that was a strong disciple, and he's the one who's mentioned here saying, we know the Jews are after you, but you know what? If that's where you want to go, I'll go with you, and I'll die with you if that's what it takes. And so I think, again, we walk by faith. We have not seen the risen Lord. We have not seen the scars. We have not put our hands into the side that was pierced with the sword, but we can still have faith. We can still have assurance based on God's word that he was raised from the dead. There's no tomb. The tomb, they certainly have not found a body. We know that he was risen. And all these, you'd think if it didn't happen, it's over 2,000 years, somebody would have come up, would have figured it out. But, they haven't, because he was raised from the dead. And again, we didn't see it. We didn't get to put our hands on his hands and feel those scars, but we can be confident. And just, again, know that sometimes our faith can be weak, but be careful of labeling someone. Recognize that we do have times of weakness, but that we need to pray to God and ask for strength to increase our faith. That's really what I wanted to talk about today, and maybe I've gone a little fast, but wanted to get through it in a timely manner. I'll open it up for any comments now in the last few minutes here that we have, and then, again, everybody will be dismissed. And yes, Betty. Yeah. 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 Yep. We walk by faith, not by sight, as we see there. Anything else? I appreciate your attention today, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. If you're worshiping with us, worship starts at about 10:45 if you weren't here for early service. Otherwise, safe travels wherever you're headed, and have a blessed day with your family. Thank you so much.